infinite in terms of disturbance of air and molecules and the creation of currents and so on and so forth. Now, it is impossible for me to have intended all those things. Most of what I do, that is to say, most of what my actions actually produce, is completely random in relation to my intentions. This is not something that's relevant to the question of whether there is determinism or not. I'm indifferent on that issue. But it is impossible to intend all the consequences of your actions. Now, does this apply to God or not? If it applies to God, and Leibniz thought it did, because Leibniz thought this is the best of all possible worlds. And possible worlds, they're not, unfortunately, some even better worlds where there's no suffering were not possible. So God has been limited because God could only create the best of all possible worlds. So what I've just said applies to God, and it means that, among other things, lots of things are random in relation to God's intentions. They weren't part of God's intentions. But if you say, oh yes, it doesn't apply to God because God, unlike you, can will every single one of these infinite consequences, then you have to face the problem of evil. And I think, ultimately, hackneyed though it be, the ultimate reason why it is simply impossible to believe in a benevolent, omnipotent God who also is omniscient, that's the traditional definition of God, if such a God were to exist, then there could not be evil. But suffering, the suffering of innocence in particular, the awful suffering brought about by nature as opposed to being brought about by human error, that kind of suffering, if God intends all consequences of whatever God does, must be laid at his feet. And therefore God cannot be all those things. Indeed, the God of the Bible, I'm not going to belabor this, but the God of the Bible is a really nasty character. He's a terrible bully. He advocates rape. He advocates genocide. And he, in particular, in the New Testament, has decreed that I will suffer eternal damnation in hell because I do not believe. According to some Christians, this fate is also one that awaits all those who are homosexual and that don't love the people that Christians think they should love, people whose minds are somehow not bent that way. Now, that is surely so vile in itself that it is absurd to suppose that God should be the source of morality. And indeed, none of you believe it, because none of you believe that literally everything in the Bible that God does or advocates is okay. There's nothing in the Bible, not one single word against slavery. So where did you get that? Not from the Bible. You got it from the way in which we are built as human beings to understand morality. Finally, I want to say this. You don't need God to have everything that religion brings you. In particular, two incredibly important things that you think come from religion. One is morality, and I've just shown that's absurd. You don't get your morality from God. On the contrary, you get your conception of God from your morality, if you're lucky. The other thing is the possibility of a mystical state of bliss. I have a friend who is a complete reductionist materialist, and he is also a mystic. And he understands perfectly well what is obviously true once you look at the brain aspect of consciousness, namely that states of mystical bliss, where somebody might think they are indeed in contact with God or one with the universe, are simply how it feels for the brain to be in certain states. And therefore, they are the proof that it is possible for physical objects, because my brain is a physical object, to experience states of consciousness in general and states of bliss in particular. Consequently, I urge you to recognize, even if you will not, as I said, be converted by this, that there is absolutely no need of religion in your life, even if what you want is what religious people most boast of having. Thank you.
I thank the member for his remarks and call upon the Speaker for side proposition to deliver a 10-minute rebuttal. Here it is.
Thank you, Ronnie, for that presentation. And let me come to the issues as quickly as I can in the darkness here. First of all, with respect to Dr. de Sousa's confession, I don't think that it is incredible or inconceivable that he doesn't believe in the God of Scripture, not at all. In fact, the Christian worldview tells us that actually there is, because of the very issue of morality that Dr. de Sousa has been talking about, there is something of an inbuilt hostility, a tendency towards hostility or an enmity in our hearts towards the God of the Bible that Dr. de Sousa has been talking about, the God of Christian theism, because of the issue of justice and accountability. So I do not think that in the least bit that it's inconceivable that Dr. de Sousa should not believe or should not want to believe, if it's all a matter of the will, in God. If it's just a matter of emotional states, I understand fully why emotionally sometimes we find the issue of God, His justice, His dealings with human beings and so forth, the way He chooses to reveal Himself, difficult. He said that we will not be persuaded either way tonight. Well, I have some sympathy with that position. I think the issue of persuasion is a complex one because we are morally and ethically and emotionally committed to our perspectives. But my question tonight was, what is the basis of persuasion and the basis of justification? You see, on Dr. de Sousa's worldview, there is no actual basis for you to be persuaded tonight because you are a brain. You are a set of chemical, neurological reactions. And tonight, your decisions about the debate tonight in Dr. de Sousa's worldview will have nothing to do with logic or reason or rationality or the sequence of your thoughts, because that is just the way the chemicals shake down in your brain. But I do agree that there are deep emotional issues that center around the question of God. Dr. de Sousa says that science and religion have the same root: imagination and wonder. Well, I would agree again to the extent that both our religious convictions and our efforts to explore the world of our experience involve the issue of wonder. But the challenge tonight in the context of this debate is which worldview, which perspective on reality, which religious commitment, the pagan type that you've heard Dr. de Sousa espouse, I don't use that as an insulting term, a belief in some kind of pre-existent chaotic energy, which was believed by the ancient Babylonians and the ancient Greeks, that all things evolved from some primeval chaos, including the gods. The gods in paganism are always stationed inside the natural universe, subject to its laws. They are completely different as a proposition from the God of Scripture. The question is, which worldview makes intelligible sense of science? And that's the question that Dr. de Sousa is sidestepping right now. How can we have induction? How can we make sense of rational inquiry, making rational inclusion? You see, David Hume's challenge is an important one. How can we have induction? How can we move from a particular observation to a general conclusion that there is going to be a consistency to our experience without the assurance that this is a rational universe, that you have a rational mind, that the relationship between your mind and the universe is also a rational one, and that you can expect that the future will be like the past. What warrants that belief? What warrants the belief in the rationality of your experience?